U.S. lawmakers draw a line in the sand on Syria rapprochement and analysis. The recent move by a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers introducing the Assad Anti-Normalization Act, a bill opposing the normalization of relations between Syria and other nations, is a clear example of the U.S. government maintaining a strong stance against the Assad regime. However, this move may have implications that extend beyond the realms of diplomacy and politics, affecting humanitarian efforts, global alliances, and economic stability in the region. The reintroduction of Syria into the Arab League and Saudi Arabia's decision to reopen embassies in Syria marked significant milestones in Syria's reintegration into the global community, following a decade of civil unrest, mass protests, and armed uprising. The act, sponsored by U.S. Representative Joe Wilson, threatens severe consequences for any government contemplating normalization with Assad's regime, revealing the contentious nature of Syria's re-engagement with the international community. Syria's government, led by President Bashar Assad, has been accused of numerous crimes against its own people by the U.S. and its allies, leading to support for anti-government forces, including the provision of weapons to militant groups. These actions have led to a complex and volatile political landscape, further complicated by the presence of a U.S. military base in the region and support for Kurdish forces controlling key territories. The Assad Anti-Normalization Act represents an escalation of economic pressure against Syria, building upon existing sanctions that critics argue are hindering Syria's reconstruction efforts. The bill's provisions, which include sanctions against foreign airports receiving Syrian planes, action against First Lady Asma Assad's charity, and scrutiny of large grants to Syria, demonstrate an intent to systematically isolate the Syrian government. While the U.S.'s commitment to justice for the Syrian people, as voiced by Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul, is commendable, it is crucial to question the potential humanitarian impact of such a hardline approach. In a country ravaged by conflict and economic instability, how might these measures affect the Syrian populace, particularly the most vulnerable? Furthermore, the bill's directive to the Department of State to monitor diplomatic contact between Syria and other nations, including key regional players like Turkey, the UAE, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia, signifies a potential shift in the balance of power in the region. This could strain U.S. relationships with these nations and lead to a re-evaluation of alliances, further destabilizing the already precarious Middle Eastern geopolitical landscape. In conclusion, while the Assad Anti-Normalization Act is a potent symbol of the U.S.'s strong stance against the Assad regime, it is critical to assess the potential consequences of such a move, considering the humanitarian impact, geopolitical shifts, and regional instability it may trigger. As the global community grapples with the complexities of the Syrian situation, a nuanced, balanced approach that respects both human rights and geopolitical realities may be more beneficial than a purely punitive one.
U.S. lawmakers threaten sanctions for Syria rapprochement. Nations normalizing relations face severe costs under a newly introduced bill. A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers has introduced a bill to oppose the normalization of relations between Syria and other nations. The Arab League reinstated the country this month, while Saudi Arabia announced the reopening of embassies with Syria. The Assad Anti-Normalization Act threatens governments considering normalization with the Assad regime with severe consequences, according to a press release by the Office of U.S. Representative Joe Wilson, the primary sponsor of the document. The government of Syrian President Bashar Assad faced mass protests and an armed uprising over a decade ago. The U.S. and its allies accused Damascus of crimes against its people and backed anti-government forces by sending weapons to militant groups, among other measures. Some of the arms ended up in the hands of outright jihadists. The Syrian government turned the tide of the conflict against the militant groups, which had taken over large parts of Syrian territory, with the help of Russia and Iran, and is now in control of most parts of the country. The U.S. now has a military base in the east, in spite of objections from Damascus, and supports the Kurdish forces which hold fertile and oil-rich regions of the country. After the opposition's failure to topple Assad, Washington introduced severe economic sanctions, which critics say significantly undermines Syria's attempts at reconstruction. The new legislation seeks to bolster the sanctions. Among other things, it targets foreign airports receiving Syrian planes, seeks to crack down on First Lady Asma Assad's charity, and subjects grants of $50,000 or more to Syria from nations in the region to sanctions review. The United States must use all of our leverage to stop normalization with Assad, Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul said of the new bill, which he co-sponsored. It mandates further sanctions against any form of investment in territory under the control of the Assad regime, as we remain committed to ensuring the Syrian people receive justice. The bill also reacts to the Arab League's re-engagement with Syria by instructing the Department of State to monitor and report to the Congress all diplomatic contacts between Damascus and certain states. The list includes Turkey, the UAE, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and others. The U.S. government would be required to implement a strategy to counter Syria rapprochement for at least 5 years under the proposed law. The lawmakers also want to be updated on what they have termed the manipulation of the UN by Damascus, referring to conditions under which UN humanitarian aid programs helping Syrians operate.